The title of my talk was, Is Peace Possible as Long as NATO Continues to Exist? Well, the answer is very simple. No, it isn't. NATO is a war-fighting machine. It continues to expand. It will not stop expanding. It's moving into Central Asia. It's moving into the Far East. And it bombs, and it seeks to get involved in one conflict after another. It provokes conflicts. And this new NATO was founded in the 1990s. It is based on lie after lie after lie. Let's look at the most fundamental lie. First of all, it claims that it is a defensive alliance. Well, let's look at Article 1 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which states quite clearly that no NATO power can get itself involved in any conflict with a non-NATO power. And if it does, then it has to resolve any conflict by exclusively peaceful means. Well, that's gone straight out of the window. Let's look at Article 5, the vaunted Article 5, which NATO talks about one for all and all for one. Well, that's not what Article 5 says. If you look at Article 5, it makes clear that should any NATO power come under attack, remember it has to come under attack, NATO powers cannot just simply start attacking anyone else. Should it come under attack, then other NATO powers can decide for themselves if and when they actually want to do anything to help. And then, of course, there's Article 10, which supposedly is all about the expansion of NATO and the new members arrive and join NATO. Well, yes, that's what Article 10 says. However, any decision about allowing new members to join NATO has to be taken in light of whether these new members will actually add anything to the security of the alliance. So if you bring in new powers, and these new powers are themselves getting into aggravated conflicts with someone else, such as Sweden and Finland, that are now rabidly, for whatever reason, rabidly Russophobic, then you're obviously endangering the security of the existing members of the alliance. So that's also a violation. This new NATO was founded in the 1990s. The lies that were perpetrated in the 1990s. But it started in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which they proclaimed that we have to protect the safe areas of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Well, of course, these safe areas were not safe. By any stretch of the imagination, they were not safe. They certainly were not safe for the Serbs, since these safe areas, the 6 safe areas that were established by the United Nations, were actually centers of Muslim armed forces. The Muslim armed forces used the so-called safe areas to launch attacks against neighboring Serbs, and when neighboring Serbs retaliated, the NATO was on hand to declare that safe areas are coming under attack from terrible Serbs. This is a humanitarian crisis. Civilians are coming under attack, even though NATO knew perfectly well that the safe areas were not safe, that they were the centers of Muslim armed forces. And of course, we had the 3 Markale massacres. Always remember, the Markale massacres always took place at crucial junctures in the war in order to generate anti-Serb sentiments within NATO and among at the United Nations. First one, in 1992, it was crucial, absolutely crucial, to impose sanctions against Yugoslavia. There was a United Nations Secretary General report that said Yugoslavia had complied with all of that had been demanded of them. They'd withdrawn their forces from Bosnia and Herzegovina. This report was suppressed in the aftermath of the first Markale massacre. Second Markale massacre took place at the moment when the Owen-Stoltenberg plan was on the brink of being signed, and was crucial because the Izetbegoviches did not want to sign this document. The Americans didn't want Izetbegovic to sign the document. Boom, second Markale massacre. The Serbs are terrible, horrible, evil people, and therefore, absolutely, we can't have any peace plans involving the Serbs. And then, of course, the third one, which took place in August 1995, was the one that launched the first big NATO attack. You know, they had the general in there, the guy they had brought in at the United Nations was General Rupert Smith. They knew exactly what they wanted. He was a British general. He could be relied upon to be anti-Serb. And they knew from the start, in each of these Markale massacres, but most explicitly in the third one, they knew that the Serbs were not responsible. The United Nations people on the ground knew the Serbs were not responsible. David Owen, who was there, and he's certainly no fan of the Serbs, David Owen said, I don't believe that the Serbs had done it. In the case of the third one, the one that launched this massive attack, the United Nations came and explicitly stated, we don't believe that the Serbs did it. But General Rupert Smith, basically NATO's man there, said, well, I wasn't really bothered, and I wasn't going to conduct any kind of investigation. I just went ahead and just ordered the bombing, which is exactly what Richard Holbrooke wanted to do. So that whole fraud, the lies that were behind in Bosnia, came into their own in the case of Kosovo. We know, we talked about this earlier, about the so-called Racak massacre, which, strangely enough, even the ICTY did not prosecute anyone for the so-called massacre, even though it was part and parcel of the propaganda war against the Serbs. But in the case of Racak, which was then used by Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton announced to the world that of the imminent start of the bombing, he talked about how women, children, and elderly men were lined up in a ditch and were massacred. Complete lie. Even what was known at the time knew that this was a lie. There were no women, there were no children, there were no old men. Bill Clinton lied about that in order to justify this completely unprovoked attack. And then we had the Rambouillet peace talks, a lie, which suggested that somehow there were these negotiations and the Serbs were obdurate, refused to negotiate, even though there were no negotiations at Rambouillet in France. The Americans had a plan of action that they would offer terms that were so humiliating for the Serbs, so absolutely devastating that they're bound to say no. And then when they say no, that would be used as the justification for the NATO attack. And of course, the Serbs knew that this is the trap that was being set for them. Milosevic, kind of a brilliant leader, he knew this is the trap that they're setting for us. So they imposed this political part of the deal, which was humiliating enough. However, Milosevic said, yeah, okay, that's fine. We'll go along with that. And the Americans were now suddenly in a bind. What can we do? We were planning on the Serbs saying no, and then we can just simply start bombing the next day. And now they say, okay, fine, we'll go along with it. So then they came up with the ingenious idea of the so-called Appendix B, which means totally unconditional, uncontrolled movement of NATO forces throughout the territory of Yugoslavia. No civil liability, no criminal liability, it's absolutely unconditional movement. And that served the task. But there was one other task they needed to do, which was they had to get the Kosovo Albanians, the KLA, who took over the negotiation, they had to get them to agree to the American plan. The problem was the KLA said, we want independence. We won't agree with anything short of independence. Well, that was a problem because some of the Europeans said, well, we can't really just simply sign on to unilateral secession. I mean, they did it earlier in the case of Croatia and Slovenia, but they didn't really want to do it again. So the Americans lied. They lied to the world, they lied to the Europeans, and didn't inform anyone that they had actually given a guarantee to the KLA that essentially they're going to have independence within 3 years. And that was it. So essentially they said, we will have a referendum within 3 years. This was a secret, absolutely, kept from the entire public, that they had made this commitment to the KLA. We will have a referendum, and that's it. They had the deal. They had this. So the Serbs said no. The Kosovo Albanians said yes. Boom, and they got the bombing campaign. So it was a bombing campaign entirely based on lies. And then this modus operandi that NATO did, of course, we had that in Libya, where NATO claimed that there was a genocide in the works in Benghazi, even though they knew perfectly well that there was nothing of the sort being planned. NATO claimed, we have United Nations Security Council authorizing the bombing. The United Nations Security Council resolution did not authorize bombing. They just talked about a no-fly zone. So NATO went ahead. And then, of course, there was, NATO claimed, we're not in the regime change business, even though they continued bombing for something like 8 months, even though there was simply no threat at all to the civilians, but they continued bombing because they wanted to kill and destroy Gaddafi. So they lied to the public, we're not in the regime change business, when that's exactly what they were doing. And then, of course, the ultimate lies that we have had in the case of Ukraine, in which they're suggesting, well, we are here to help Ukraine defend itself, even though they themselves, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, has openly said, we have been active in Ukraine since 2014. We've been pouring in arms, we've been providing training, providing money. He's admitted it. So you were there 2014, you didn't just respond in 2022. And most important of all, he admitted that the cause of this war was NATO's and the United States' refusal in December 2021, when Putin presented two plans for a new security architecture in Europe based on the Helsinki agreements of 1975, in which the security of one state cannot be at the security of anyone else's. Stoltenberg admitted it. Yeah, this was what the cause of this war. The Russians came up with a plan for a new security conference, a revitalized Helsinki, in which we can't simply have states just sort of saying, oh, well, everyone has a right to join NATO. Well, everyone doesn't have a right to join NATO. You don't have a right to join a hostile military alliance. You don't have a right to impose a hostile military alliance on the doorstep of other states. That's always been, everyone has always accepted it, the notion that you have just this unconditional right to join a hostile military alliance, and everyone just simply puts up with it. But obviously that isn't the case, and it wasn't the case at Helsinki. And therefore this was what caused the war, and Stoltenberg blurted this out. It has nothing to do with Russian aggression, it has nothing to do with Russian imperial ambitions. It was about creating a security architecture which wasn't dominated by NATO. And that was obviously not what NATO has in mind. So then the question is, what do we do about it now? Well, I think it's very simple. I think it's up to every single politician in every single European country, in every single, including the United States and Canada, to say that there is no more important principle at stake other than the liquidation of NATO, withdrawal from NATO immediately. Not next week, but immediately. And if somebody says, well, you're being pro-Putin, then you say, no, I'm not being pro-Putin. I'm being pro-French if you're a French politician. If you're an Italian politician, I'm being pro-Italian. If you're an American politician, you're pro-American. And that's what it is. You're pursuing your own national interests rather than joining a violent, aggressive alliance that could get us into a nuclear conflagration here in Ukraine. But even if we're lucky, even if we manage to avoid one in Ukraine, we're not going to be so lucky next time. Sooner or later, NATO is going to provoke a world war, and that could well lead to use of nuclear weapons. Again, could happen next week, next year, the year after that, but it will happen. Therefore, the only thing we can do is immediate dissolution of NATO. There's no more urgent task than that. Thank you very much.